Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today we have entered day 122 of the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And over the last 24 hours, we have seen a major uptick in Russian cruise missile attacks, really all across Ukrainian territory. Specifically, we have seen the Russian cruise missile attacks in this locale of Yavoriv. This location has been hit before. There was one reported strike that the death toll in terms of that strike has been varying with low estimates anywhere from 30 KIA to over 120 wounded. This was a key staging area for the training of foreign forces. It was also used by NATO forces in the training of Ukrainian forces as well. And we believe that this is also the home base of the Ukrainian 24th Mechanized Brigade, which probably may not be currently barracked at this locale. But we do understand that more cruise missiles hit this locale. And obviously it had been hit earlier as well. Additionally, to the northeast of Kiev, this is another verified point of attack that occurred in the locality of Desna. And again, more cruise missile strikes by Russian forces. This was a hodgepodge of cruise missiles launched from aircraft to include strategic bombers and launching of cruise missiles from the Black Sea as well. And we estimate right now that this attack was anywhere from 30 to 50 cruise missiles and long-range Iskander types of systems that targeted Ukrainian forces. Additionally, we are continuing to see the collapse of Ukrainian forces in the east. Obviously, this map has changed quite a bit over the last 24-48 hours. We originally were seeing a pocket form around Zolot, and obviously that has since collapsed. Ukrainian forces have withdrawal, and Russian forces have overrun large sections of this area and are now both approaching Lysychansk from the rear and from the south, while at the same time Russian forces continue to take control of areas around Severodonetsk and really all along the Donets River basin. And we estimate that probably within the next several days, we will probably see Lysychansk fall. These forces, the Ukrainian forces that are continuing to operate within the confines of Lysychansk, are at a great threat of being completely encircled and trapped and not being able to withdraw out of this battle space. And we could see as many as 2,000 to 4,000 Ukrainian forces that could be at some point trapped in Lysychansk, especially if the main arterial routes out of Lysychansk are severed by Russian forces. And obviously that would be very, very bad for Ukrainian forces in this ongoing conflict. Other news coming out of the battle space indicates that the Ukrainians are starting to use more and more of its territorial defense forces. These forces originally were stood up and designed to protect certain municipalities from Russian attack. And specifically, territorial defense forces were stood up in Kiev and cities all across Ukraine, specifically Lviv and other areas as well. And originally, these forces were designed to stay in their locality of residence, meaning if you were a territorial defense member and you signed up to become a territorial defense member within the confines of Lviv, that's where you would be permanently stationed. Now we're understanding that because of attrition and ongoing battlefield losses, these territorial units are now being sent to various locales towards the front line, and have in fact been used in frontline conflict. Obviously, we saw that north of Kiev, west of Kiev, in the early stages of the war. But as regular Ukrainian military units, ground forces units, National Guard units continue to suffer casualties and attrition over the course of the conflict, obviously territorial units are starting to augment these forces to reinforce some of these forces. And it's just the nature of war. Obviously, when initial sign-up occurred, no one was anticipating that we would be going into the 5th month of conflict, and obviously it could last very much longer. And in the nature of this war, we will probably see general conscription start to take place as the Ukrainian military continues to wear down by Russian forces. Now, the big issue right now for these territorial units that are being sent towards the front line is their training. Most of these units are receiving roughly 5 days, 5 to 7 days of military training before they are deployed with a territorial defense unit, and thus being quite possibly deployed to frontline forces within some ability to try and counter Russian forces. Now, obviously, that is not enough training for those forces that could be going into combat. If you look at other nation states, obviously there's significantly more training, anywhere from 16 weeks on up to 22 weeks, depending on the nation that military belongs to. But right now, these territorial defense forces are getting about 5 to 7 days of training and then being sent off. Now, these units could have, meaning the individuals that are signing up for these units, could have prior experience within the armed forces of Ukraine. Maybe they could have served in the ground forces and then had exited the service and then have since joined up. Now, obviously, they would receive the 5 to 7 days of training, but they would also have that experience with the Ukrainian ground forces during that prior period. But the real issue is just conditioning and getting those anywhere from 30-year-old to 40-year-old volunteers in proper military fighting condition. I can tell you that I am in much different shape now than I was when I was 18, and obviously that is the same way for many persons out there. And I could only imagine signing back up for a combat arms unit at my stage in life. It would be very, very physically difficult. Obviously, war is a younger man's game, and that is what you tend to see enlisted, and not as we see really all across the spectrum, both in Russia and Ukraine, 30, 35, 40-year-old men that are also signing up as well. Now, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of 40-year-olds in pretty good shape that are perfectly fit and able to conduct military operations. However, generally speaking, that is not the overall case when you compare an 18-year-old, a 20-year-old with a 35 to 40-year-old. But again, this is one big concern right now within the social construct of Ukrainian society, the issue of these territorial forces that are being pressed into combat service with very little training. And we have many, many anecdotal accounts of individuals that have absolutely no military experience whatsoever being pressed into Ukrainian military service. Well, they volunteered for the locality that they were in, probably way far from the frontline areas, but now as attrition continues and the Ukrainians continue to face losses, they have no choice but to move some of these territorial defense units towards the front line to augment some of these Ukrainian ground force units. Now, they may not entirely be conducting actual infantry operations. They could be used simply as more or less manual labor in uniform, meaning they are loading and unloading ammunition, carrying supplies, transporting supplies to and from the front. And it really, and obviously some are in direct combat as well. But as the conflict continues to progress, we will probably see more and more of very poorly trained Ukrainian forces being sent to the front. And the big concern for Ukrainian forces is the early successes that Ukrainian military units saw in the early stages of the conflict was due to the high standards of training that a lot of these Ukrainian military units had gone through. And we can tell you that the air mobile units, the special forces units, some of the special forces units for the Ukrainian National Guard, were trained by NATO advisors to an incredibly high standard. Not only that, the experience that was then gained with these air mobile units, marine units, ground forces, special forces units, light infantry units, mechanized infantry units that fought the Russian proxy forces in the east gained a lot of valuable experience. And then again, the qualitative edge for Ukrainian forces were very, very present when we saw the Russian landings towards the north of Kiev, such as in Hostomel. Russian forces were immediately set upon by very, very well-trained Ukrainian units that proved to have the ability to engage Russian units directly in combat, and I think at that point it probably surprised a lot of Russian units in terms of both the aggressiveness that was shown on the part of Ukrainian units, and just how tenacious they fought. But unfortunately for the Ukrainians, a lot of these units that were involved in the early stages of the conflict that were able to turn the tide on Russian forces north of Kiev, northeast of Kiev, a lot of these units have since seen a lot of casualties. And a lot of these units have been degraded that performed very well against Russians in the early stages of the conflict. And the problem is these units are nowhere near the level of proficiency that they were at the early stages of the conflict. It's just been the toll of war and the ability of the Russians to attack supply depots, training depots, and actual combat units in the field with both tactical fixed air assets, helicopter gunships, long-range fires, which have now degraded the capabilities within the Ukrainian forces. And that's why we're kind of seeing what we're seeing now on the ground take place within the confines of Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and slowly other frontline cities such as Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and Bakhmut as well. And right now, it is proving to be a very, very difficult challenge for Ukrainian forces to continue to stop this kind of tide of Russian forces that continue to press forward and seize control of territory in incremental amounts. But nonetheless, they are doing it, and more importantly, the Russians are destroying the Ukrainian army in the field with the use of massed fires and, again, tactical air assets and the continued use of cruise missiles and long-range precision fire systems against Ukrainian forces quite literally hundreds of miles into the Ukrainian rear. And that's kind of what we're seeing for today. Again, not a lot of changes. Obviously, I'm using a different map today that probably more accurately shows the amount of territory that has been taken by Russian forces. I believe that other map I was using was fairly accurate, but it probably wasn't showing the tempo and pace of Russian advance as it was actually occurring. But right now, this is kind of where we're sitting for Russian forces. Again, Lysychansk is in a very dire situation right now in terms of being completely enveloped by Russian forces as they continue this pressure campaign all the way from Izum down through Severodonetsk and all the way towards the Horlovika as well. So fairly wide front. If you take in the area in terms of land mass and what is currently happening. But that's what we have for today. We're continuing to watch the situation, and obviously we'll have more very, very soon. Thanks for joining us. More to come very soon.